So now we're on Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis, on the second line. Ano aminucha ano sota vada v'yamet liat sota sofek u'maishna sota vadai. Why is it in sota vada there's no yibum, no chalitza? Shum dechsiv tuma is sofek sota sofek nami tuma ksiv be. Right? The Torah says v'nistera, she violated his kinui, went into that private place, v'hi nitma. So you see that the word tuma is used by the Torah even to describe a sota of sofek. So if in the case of Vada, you're saying that the Torah called her Tuma Karayos, and if there's no Chalitza, then likewise, in the case of a suffix Sota, meaning a Kini and Stira situation, the Torah calls her Tuma. And according to your logic, she should be excluded from Chalitza. And yet it says here Choletzes. Desanya Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur Omer Mishum Rabbi Loza Machzir Grushaso Min Anesuit Asura Min Ha'eres Muteres Mishum Shenemar Achrei Asher Hu Tama. So according to the Shita of Yossi, we'll get back to Rabbi Yossi a little bit later on. If a person divorces his wife, if she marries with Nesuin, another man, then she's not allowed to go back to her first husband. He cannot marry. That's an Isur law. But if she only had Erisin and not Nesuin with another man, and then he died or he gave her a divorce, then Mutar, she's allowed to go back to her original husband, her first husband, if he wants to marry. And how do we derive this? Because it says, Achrei Asher Hutama. Hutama means because she had Be'ila with another man. But here in this case of Erison, there's Adayin Lo Hutama. She didn't have a relationship with him, and therefore she can go back to her first husband. But we're more interested now in the Chacham. Chachamim Omrim, Achasu v'Achasu Asura. Whether or not she had Nisuin with the second husband or even Erison, she cannot go back to her first husband. And how do we know that? And how did the Chacham derive this? The pasuk right before this pasuk of Achrei Asher Hutama says V'yatza mibeso v'alcha le'ish acher, and it doesn't say that she had Be'ila with each acher. It just says v'haisa le'ish acher. Haisa is called Havaya. And Havaya is a lashon of Erison, without Nesuin. And then the pasuk says, "Lo yuchal baila richon lashuv lekachta." But now we have a problem. According to Chachamim, what do we do with the pasuk that Rabbi Yossi had quoted? The pasuk says, "Achrei asher hutama," and hutama means be'ila. Ela ma'ani makayim achrei asher hutama l'rabo sota shenistera. So we see clearly that the Chachamim consider a sota to be tuma, to be tmeya. So the lashon tuma applies even to a sota. And if your principle, Rav, is that when the Torah calls this sota a tmeya, it means karayos, then that should be enough to pater a patsara. So why does Rav defend himself by saying, don't ask me any kashas from a sota, because the sota is only a suffix, and therefore the tzara needs chalitza, and maybe she herself also needs chalitza. That's not a kasha, because that's only a suffix, and that's not tuma ksiva be. And tuma ksiva be, dorais, only applies in the case of a vada. But what are you talking about? Here we have the Chachamim Shita, who's addressing the case of a sota, where it says Minister of Initma. We don't know. We don't have any Eidim that she had the Ilah, that she had this Maises Nus. We only have Stira. And yet the Torah says, Achrei asher hu tamah, the Rabbo Sota, Shekina v'Nistera. So even in case of a suffix, which is the classic scenario of a Sota, the Torah calls her Tmeya, which means that there's no Yibum, no Chalitza. So how can you go ahead, Rav, and defend yourself and say, well, you don't ask me any kashas, don't ask me any kashas from a Sota. Sota is only a suffix, I'm dealing with a Avad. So the Gemara answers, no, Achrei asher hu tamah is not referring to a suffix Sota. Only a suffix Vade, the Eidim testified to Chetznus. Umay Nistera, I the Chachamim say here, L'Rabo Sota Nistera. Nistera means it was only a suffix. The answer is Nivala. Cross out the word Nistera and replace it with the word Nivala. My correlate Nistera, so why did he call it Nistera? Mishnah Ma'al Yanok. And he was only using a Lashon Nakiya. But what he meant was Nivala. And Nivala means that she had two Eidim, and then she's called Tuma, and then Rav says there's no Yibum and no Chalitz. The Gemara asks Nivala Tuma behejek sivbe. Why would the Torah have bothered by saying V'nistra v'nitma? We already know V'nistra v'nitma. And the Torah is saying it twice. And we'll go over the psukim one more time. It says in Parshas Naso, V'nistra v'hi nitma. And now you have a pasuk in Parshas Kiteitzei in Sefer Dvarim. Lo yuchal baila rishon asher shlacha shilcha lo'atshuv v'lekachta lios l'ich achrei asher hu tamah. So you're telling me achrei asher hu tamah is a reference to Nivala. Well, if that be the case, why do I need a pasuk of achrei asher hu tamah when I already have the pasuk in Parshas Naso v'nisra v'nitma? You're not adding anything. So the Gemara answers, "L'meikim Allah b'lav." If we only had the pasuk in Parshas Naso v'nisra v'nitma, that would only give me a lashon of essay, of a mitzvah aseh. You would not get malchus for violating the essay. But if we go back to the pasuk in Kiteitzei, there it says Lo yuchal baila rishon lashon l'kach lios l'ishachrei ha'utama. That's already a lotaseh, which generates malchus. Now the Gemara comes back to explain the Shita Rabbi Yossi ben Kippar. Rabbi Yossi ben Kippar, right? He says Achrei asher hu tamah in Parshas Kiteitzei is referring to a machzir grushaso situation. Is lav b'sota Leslie. He doesn't have a lav b'sota because the Rabbanan use the pasuk Achrei asher hu tamah to refer to a sota, and hence, if a man has a relationship with his wife who's a sota, he violates a lav. But if that same pasuk, according to Rabbi Yossi, is referring to machzir grushaso, then we have to conclude that in the case of a sota, there is no lav. It's only an essay. Lav b'sota less. V'afilu zanai. Zanai is miloshin znus, meaning even if we know she had znus, and we have two Eidim that testified to that effect, nevertheless, his relationship with her, if he has such an intimacy, his original husband, would be a violation of an essay. No law. My timer. What led Rabbi Yossi ben Akfar to this conclusion that Achrei asher hu tamah is not referring to a sota? And the answer is Havaya v'ishas ksivei. Very simply, read the parsha. The parsha says v'yotza mibeisa v'holcha v'oisa lishacher. And then the Torah says, we're talking about a case of machzir grushaso. So if you read the psukim kipshuton, it's not referring to a sota. We don't have a lav for sota. We have a lav for machzir grushaso. Sota is no more than an S. A man is not allowed to marry his ex-wife after she has a marriage to someone else, and he went ahead and he did so. And he married her, and then he died without any children. It's Sarasa Mahu. The Gemara seems to be assuming that as far as she is concerned, the Maxa Grucha, so for sure there's no mitzvah of Yibum. But could there be a mitzvah of Yibum with regard to Tzara? The Gemara says the following. This is called the Lishna Kama. I'll leave it to Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur, Loti Boilach. Pshita. In this case, for sure, we're going to pater up Tzara. Why? Came to Rabbi Yossi ben Chita Tuma b'machse grushasa hu deksiva. And therefore, in the case of machse grushasa, it's considered like an erva. It's tzarasa kemosa. We know that the din of tzaras erva, the first mission in Masechet, is p'turim and ayibim and achalitza. The imi shum deksiva toevahi. Now he's coming lafuke the Lishna Basra. The Lishna Basra is going to make a big deal about the extra word he. He is always a mute. So since the Torah says to'eva he, it sounds like it's excluding a case of a tzara, meaning she is considered to'eva because she's considered tuma karayas. But as far as the tzara is concerned, she was excluded under the word he, so she should require yibum. No. That's not how Rabbi Yossi in the Lishna Kama is going to interpret the word he. He to'evim ain't but now to'evim. If a man remarries his wife, violating an Isulav because she had married someone else, now the child, let's say she's a daughter, can she marry a Kohen? After all, she's a product of a marriage that's a violation of Allah. And the answer is she's allowed to marry a Kohen. Because the Torah only prohibits a bas who comes from a marriage that's illegitimate to kahuna. Let's say, for example, if a Kohen Gadol would have a relationship with an almana, and the Torah says to Kohen Gadol, Isha bipsuleo yikach, the child, if she, let's say they have a daughter, would be psula kahuna. Why? Because she came from a marriage that was a violation of an Isa kahuna. But here, in the case of Maxa Grushasa, that's not a violation of an Isa kahuna, hence the bas is muteres lekohen. But Hatzarasa Toeva, once the Torah upgrades Maxa Grushaso to the level of Tuma, and that was the whole point of Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur, therefore the Tzara is like a Tzaras Erev. But Kiti Boilacha Aliba Dirabbanan. The Rabbanan say that Achrei Asher Hutama only applies to a Sota and not to Maxa Grushasa. Should we say the following? The Gemara is now going through the desolation of Tutztod. But ain't Mikra Yotzib de Pshuto. The whole parsha is talking about Maxa Grushasa. So on a level of drash, of Torah Shebal Peh, you can certainly say that the Torah is calling a Sota Tuma. But on a level of Pshat, the word Tuma is a description of Maxa Grushasa. Oh, Dilma came into Yakir. Should we say no? And since I'll be Torah Shebal Peh, we reinterpret the word Tuma, referring to Sota. Therefore, we take the word Tuma out of the parsha, out of the Pshat, and there's no indication that Maxa Grushasa is called Tuma. Therefore, there'd be no source to pater up from Yibum. So that's the Lishna Kama. Now we get to the Lishna Basra. Ika Diamri, according to the second transmission, I'll leave it around Banaloti Boilacha. What we said is that it's pashut that the tzara of a Maxa Grushaso misya bemis. Why? Kavan the isaker. According to the Rabbanon, the parsha is not referring to Maxa Grushasa, but rather to Sota Shezinsa. And therefore there's no source to upgrade Machzik Gushasa to the state of Tumah. Kiti Boilach, I'll leave it to Rabbi Yossi ben Kippar. My Afal Gav, the Omer Rabbi Yossi ben Kippar Tumah, and Machzik Gushasa who the Tzima. But nevertheless, Mi'et Rachmana He Toeva. The extra word He is a miut. And what does it teach me? The Ein Tzarasa Toeva. Okay, so the Tzara is not considered a Toeva. And even though Tumah v'Machzik Grushaso Ksiv, which gives the Machzik Grushaso, the Grusha herself, a status of Erva, but nevertheless, Hatzara is not considered an Erva because of the miut of He. O Dilma, shall we say no? He Toeva v'Ein Baneh Toeva. Hatzarasa Toeva. Logically, we should have said that the tzara has the din of its erva because Machzik Gushas, according to Rabbi Yossi, has the status of an erva, and its erva therefore is not in yivum. Unless we have a drush of hitoeva, but if we can send that drush down a different pathway, and it's only coming to tell you that the daughter who's married from a Machzik Gushas violation is ksheira l'kahuna, and I don't have the miut of he to change the status quo as far as the tzara is concerned. She's a tzaras erva. Where's the erva Machzik Gushaso? That's Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi says that Tumah Ksiv Bekarayas. Amalei T'nisua. So Rav Sheshes responds to Rabbi Yehuda that this din, the status of the tzara, is explicit in the Mishnah. Where's this Mishnah on Daf Mem Dalet? A man is married to two wives and he dies without children. Now his two wives fall for yibum to his surviving brother. Is bi'asa or chalitza shalachas men poteres et sarasa. Hoisa achas kshera v'achas psula. One of his wives is disqualified. Im haya choletz lepsula. If the yavam decides he opts for chalitza, he should give chalitza lepsula. Im haya miyavim l'kshera. My kshera umay psula. If we're talking about someone who, for the world, meaning for Kohanim, has the status of a kshera, psula alma means a grusha or a chalutza from a previous marriage, and she can no longer marry Kohen. Is kevan delididei chazia my nafkale mina? He's not a Kohen, so what difference does it make whether or not she's psula? What do you mean by psula? Psula is only relevant to a Kohen. He's not a Kohen. Elalav kshera lei, psula lei. So we're not talking li alma, but we're talking lei to the late brother. My ninu. What would be a case where one's own wife is psula to the husband? Machzik Grushaso. And Ketani, he's only allowed to marry the kshera. Which means that even though the psula is a Machzik Grushaso situation, which according to Rabbi Yossi, for example, is considered Tumah Karayos, nevertheless, he could be miyabim with kshera, meaning hatzara. So there's no din in tzaras erva. So we now have a clear-cut proof, says Rav Sheshes, that the tzara of a Machzik Grushaso is kshera l'yibum. Mar says lo. Li olam kshera kshem li alma, psula alma. We're talking about Kohanim. He's not a Kohen. Mine after mina. Why are you telling him, something about the psula? It's not psula for him. He's not a Kohen. The answer is Mishum de Rav Yosef. The Rav Yosef kan shon Rebbe lo yishpach adam made boro ve'acherim tzrichim lahem. That if you have a woman who is ksheira lakuna, don't give her chalitza. Give chalitza to the woman who's psula lakuna. So if, let's say, Reuven dies and leaves two wives for Yibum to Shimon. One of those two wives had a previous husband, and she was divorced from that husband. Then when these two ladies fall for Yibum, if the Yavam opts for chalitza, give chalitza to the one who was once married and divorced, because she's anyway psul lakuna. The chalitza doesn't in any way disqualify for kunu, because she's already disqualified for kunu as a grusha. So therefore, give chalitza to the kshera. I'm sorry, give chalitza to the psula if you opt for chalitza. Toshma, let's try to be poshet this suffix of Rabbi Yehuda. Amachsigu chasa michenises, he vitzarasa choletzes. Now, what does that mean? He has to give chalitza to both wives? The Yavam has to give two chalitzas? Salkedaita? He vitzarasa salkedaita. Can you take this literally? We know that one chalitza works for all the tzaros. Ela ema bereda. This is what the Bryce has in mind. Oh, he o tzarasa. You can give chalitza to the she or her tzara. So we see clearly that the tzara of a machzir gushaso only lends herself to chalitza. She's asura liyibum. And that gives you the answer to your original suffix, Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara rejects it and says, Lav tirutza komentaritzle. We have to reinterpret this brisa because it says in the brisa, he v'tzarasa choletzes, and we have to reinterpret it as he otzarasa choletzes. It's tritz hachi. Let's rewrite it in this way. He choletzes, meaning there's no possibility of yibum. As far as the machzir grushaso is concerned, the grusha, but as far as sarasa, all choletzes omes yabemes. So that halacha that it's saras machzir grushaso is asur liyibum is now rejected. And this leads us to Omer Abchia Bar Abba here on the bottom, the first of the wide lines on the bottom of the Amud. But we ran out of time, so this is where we're going to stop. And Amir Hashem in tomorrow's shir, which is on Yud Beis, we'll start from Omer Abchia. Okay, then, let me wish you a great day. Thank you so much.